عدد ما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. On this day of Jumu'ah, our Messenger ﷺ has asked us to recite abundant salawat upon him. So I'd like to remind everybody, myself and you, to recite many salawat. Now the salawat I just recited, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, Allah please shower your mercy, blessings upon our Messenger ﷺ. عدد ما ذكره الذاكرون, in accordance with the number of those who remember him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وَغَفَلَ عَنْ ذِكْرِهِ الْغَافِلُونَ, and also in accordance with the number of those who are heedless of him, who don't remember him and don't send salawat upon him. Imam al-Shafi'i, rahmatullah alayhi, wrote this salawat in one of his books. Now, when Imam al-Shafi'i passed away, somebody saw him in a dream and they asked him, what happened to you when you died? Imam al-Shafi'i said, the thing which benefited him the most was not the books that he wrote, the students he produced. He got reward for all of those things, but he said that when he died, rahimahullah, he was showered with mercy and blessings. He said, I walked into Jannah like a bride and a groom. You know, when someone's getting married and they walk down the aisle and people are showering their love and their affectionate words and rose petals on them, Imam al-Shafi'i said, I was treated in that way by the angels. And the reason for that was because of the salawat that I wrote, and I used to recite it all the time. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, adada ma dhakarahu dhakirun wa ghafala an dhikrihi ghafilun. So this is a salawat that I would recommend everybody to recite today, inshallah, as much as possible, so that you and I are honoured in the same way when we die. You can find it online as well, just type in the salawat of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah. Now the last two khutbahs, I spoke about the situation in Gaza. I want to touch upon that briefly and then move on. So, I asked one of my shaykhs that I've spoken about 40 hadith, 40 sayings of our Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which talk about Fadail al-Sham wa ahliha, the virtues of Ash-Sham. I told you Ash-Sham means Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and northeast Egypt, southern Turkey. That whole area is called Ash-Sham, which means a beauty spot. So there are 40 hadiths about the virtues of Ash-Sham and its people. And then we talk about some practical steps we can do to help those people, writing to your MP, protesting, going and visiting Al-Aqsa Masjid in person and giving charity. And then there are spiritual aspects to it as well, lots of istighfar for our shortcomings, lots of dua and so forth. So one of my teachers, he said to me that I think that's all there is really to say on the topic. We can't do much more than this. But one of the things he said is that you should also emphasize the importance of speaking out in the presence of our leaders. So as you can see that there are many Muslim MPs and councillors, Muslims in all types of leadership positions who have remained silent on these kind of issues. They're very quick to talk about celebrating something to do with the royal family or any other irrelevant things, but they've been quiet about these things. And our Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that anybody who remains silent when they see something bad, they are a shaitan akhras. They are like a shaitan who's dumb, who doesn't have a tongue. And that we also speak out, those of us who have the ability, against the Muslim leaders, and we also do dua for them as well. And what our Shaykh said is that if they're not speaking out right now, they need to realize that they could be next. After the people of Gaza are dealt with, the fitna could spread and other Muslim countries could be targeted. And when the shuyukh, the awliya, they say these things quite often, then it makes me think that we have to hope for the best but be prepared for the worst. Because some of the awliya have said, the great ulama, that not only will this area of Al-Quds, Palestine, be dealt with in this way, but many of the Muslim states will collapse. In fact, Imam Ahmad Rida Khan, rahimahullah, known as Al-Azhari from the Indian subcontinent, he says that the Mahdi will come, in his view, and he could be right, could be wrong, but he said, in my view, from the spiritual insight I've been given, the Mahdi will come in the year 1900 Hijri. So now we're in 1445. So he said that by that time, according to my spiritual insight, there will be no Muslim state, Muslim government left, they will all collapse like dominoes, one after the other, and that's the time when the Mahdi will come. So it could be very long until we see the time of the Mahdi, who will rid these occupying forces of these places. So we have to do dua for our leaders, that may Allah give them the courage to speak out, because if they don't speak out, then they will be next. Because as you know, that the Zionists, they have this idea of owning the Greater Israel, which is from the Nile to the Euphrates. That's their long-term vision. And they can't even hide this fact. Some of them have already came out and said that Egypt must play ball. That the people of Gaza have to go to Egypt. Egypt has to play ball with us. Their sites are written in this. But in this regard, we have to remember that we should do dua for our leaders as well. May Allah give them hidayah. And we have to remember that our leaders are a reflection of our actions. For example, I studied in Egypt for 3 years, in Al-Azhari, and my family are originally from Pakistan. Many of you here are from Muslim countries. You will know that when you go to these Muslim countries, you cannot move from point A to point B as soon as you get out of the airport to get your visa, to get anywhere. Even in the universities there, to get your paperwork done. They'll say, come back tomorrow, and you have to pay what's called bakshish, hilwa, a little bit of a bribe to sweeten up the person. There's corruption at the micro and macro level. So there's a saying, which is attributed to Sayyidina Ali, apparently Sayyidina Ali, he said, Umara'una a'maluna, that our leaders are a reflection of our actions. And there are some hadith as well, which back up this saying of Sayyidina Ali, that the way you are, that's the kind of leader that you will have. So, yes, we complain about the leaders of our Muslim countries, but when the Muslims reform themselves, get rid of their corruption on the grassroots level, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them pious and righteous leaders, like Sayyidina Umar. Hajjaj bin Yusuf, who was a great tyrant in the Muslim world, he killed over 100,000 people, including many Sahaba. He said to the people that you rectify yourself, you reform yourselves, and you will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala automatically making me reformed as well. And an example of this in the last century is that the Egyptians and the Syrians, they attacked the state of Israel in 1967, and they had the most humiliating defeat. All the Arab states were defeated in the most humiliating manner in 1967. Now, one of the greatest scholars and saints of Egypt in the 20th century was Shaykh Sha'rawi. If you mention to any Arab, Shaykh Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi, they all know him. He was the big superstar in the Arab world because he used to give regular tafsir, dars of the Quran. Shaykh Sha'rawi, he said that when the Egyptian and Syrian armies lost against the state of Israel in 1967, he said, I prayed 2 rakat of shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because they were Arab nationalists. The leadership at that time was Arab nationalists. They were not interested in Islam. In fact, under that government, under that leader, many ulama were tortured and killed and jailed. And then in 1973, the new president of Egypt was Anwar Sadat. Now, nobody's perfect. He may have had his shortcomings, but he was more religious, more Islamically inclined. He was not Arab nationalist. And so the Shaykh Al-Azhar in 1973 was Abdul Halim Mahmoud. Abdul Halim Mahmoud, being a very pious person, the Shaykh of Al-Azhar al-Sharif, he had a dream in 1973 in which he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Khalid bin Walid radiyallahu anhu crossing the Sinai Peninsula, and the army of Misr of Egypt were with them. So they were leading the Muslim army across the Sinai Peninsula. So Shaykh Abdul Halim Mahmoud, he went and informed Anwar Sadat about this, and Anwar Sadat, he took this as an ishara, a bishara, a glad tidings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that now we should strike them because there's more Islam in us. You see, in 1967, some of the soldiers who fought in 1967, they said that the night before the battle, even though we outnumbered the Israelis significantly, the night before the battle, the army in Egypt, they were giving out illicit magazines, haram magazines to one another. They were gambling, they were doing all these haram things, and that's why Allah humiliated them. But in 1973, 6 years later, they reformed themselves, and as a result of that, they managed to get somewhat of a victory in 1973. They managed to get the Sinai Peninsula back. So the victory of the Muslims is linked to their spirituality. And we all know this. We know from the Battle of Badr how the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam took all the practical steps, but then he prayed all night, and the angels came to help the people in Badr, and how he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam took all the practical steps at his disposal, and then towards the end of the Battle of Ahzab, he prayed and prayed, and on Wednesday, this is why you should do dua on Wednesday from Zuhr to Asr, this is the time that your dua is accepted, because on Wednesday he prayed sallallahu alayhi wa sallam between Zuhr and Asr for victory against the Ahzab, the 10,000 soldiers of Arabia, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the thunderstorm and the winds that made them retreat. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help our leaders to be rectified, but may He also help all the Muslims on a grassroots level to rectify themselves, to get rid of their corruption. And when the Muslims rectify themselves on the grassroots, they'll automatically, inshallah, find their leaders becoming good people. And in this regard, I want to move on to one of the greatest reformers, one of the greatest spiritual giants in our history, who was Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah. Because he died in the 11th of Rabi'ul Thani, the month that we're in right now, and he was actually living throughout the Crusades. This is something that I was thinking about recently, that from a young age, we used to go to the masajid throughout Rabi'ul Thani. We'd hear many lectures on the karamat, the miracles of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah. But there were two things we didn't hear much about, which when you do your own study, you learn. Firstly, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah, who lived throughout the Crusades, because the Crusades of Europe, they occupied the Holy Land from 1099 till 1187, almost 90 years. And Salahuddin Ayyubi, as you know, in 1187, he's the one who liberated Al-Azhari, and he was somebody who, at a young age, and him and his uncle, Nuruddin Azangi, they are two people who, when they were young, they took a lot of knowledge and spiritual benefit, guidance from Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And many of the soldiers in the army of Salahuddin Ayyubi, many of them were the students and spiritual disciples of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani or of Imam al-Ghazali. These two personalities. Imam al-Ghazali and Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani lived through those 90 years where Al-Quds Sharif was occupied and people were killed and so forth. And what they focused on was reforming people's hearts, reforming their character, learning and teaching. Through learning and teaching, you reform people's character, and that's what leads to the victory of the Muslims. So they were two individuals who thought, we can't go there now and fight these crusaders in person, but what we can do is patiently reform ourselves, educate ourselves Islamically. As I mentioned previously, that throughout the Muslim world, whenever a calamity would strike, the Muslims would gather together in the masajid and they would read books like Sahih al-Bukhari, and they would read books like Al-Quduri, which is a Hanafi fiqh book, because they believed that by reading hadith and by reading these books of fiqh that were written with sincerity, and talking about the sincerity, one of the books that we study in Hanafi fiqh, one is called Quduri, and the commentary of it is called Al-Hidayah. The author of Al-Hidayah, it is said about him that it took him 13 years to write the book, and the majority of that time, whilst he was writing the book, almost every day he was fasting almost every day for those 13 years. And that's why Allah gave his book Al-Hidayah, which was written almost 1,000 years ago. Allah has given it such popularity that it's studied in every Darul Ulum now. But this is what we have to do. When we gather together in the masajid and read books like Al-Bukhari, read books like Al-Hidayah, Al-Quduri, then we will see the barakah descend from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the calamity is removed. So all those people who are protesting, alhamdulillah, very nice to see, over 100,000 people in London. But how many of them will go now and pray 5 times a day? How many of them will come and attend a dars al-Quran, a dars of the commentary of Sahih al-Bukhari, a dars of fiqh? That's where the barakah lies. When people get together in the house of Allah to study these things, that's when divine mercy and aid and protection descends upon the Muslim world. So Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah, throughout his 90 years of life, what he did was, he was very patient. And we have to remember that there's no quick fix to this problem that's happening right now. It will take perhaps decades or even centuries for this situation to be resolved. So we have to be very patient. We have to rectify and reform ourselves, purify our hearts, and that's when the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come.
So the practical thing Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani did was, he took thousands of students, gave them scholarships, and he trained them to be mujahideen, but at the same time he equally educated them. So we would always hear about Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani as somebody who did karamat all the time, miracles, but the majority of his life, and this was seldom mentioned by the ulama, he was a teacher. So he was studying day and night till the age of about 50. And that's when he then came out and started teaching. And he would teach 12, 13 subjects a day, all day teaching tafsir, hadith, fiqh, seerah, all the Islamic sciences, producing ulama who would reform themselves, reform the character of their people, so that they don't become like those Egyptians in 1967, that kind of army that the night before it's going to battle is looking at innocent magazines, gambling, doing everything haram. When we reform ourselves and the ulama reform themselves, that's when we will see the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming. So Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah, someone asked him that how did you attain this high status Allah has given you, that you are the greatest ghawth, the qutb of your time. And I mentioned last week, I recommended a book that we can read. One of them is this one here by Imam Suyuti, a scholar from the 15th century. That some people object upon this terminology. Why are you using this terminology like ghawth and qutb and abdal for the great awliya? So Imam Suyuti, who wrote 1,000 books in the 15th century, he wrote this book which has now been translated into English. And he proves in this book that these terms, some of them are used in hadith. The Messenger ﷺ mentioned the word abdal. He said, La tasubbu ahl al-Sham. Don't curse the people of Asham, because there are always 40 men and women amongst the people of Asham who are the abdal, who are the great saints. And through those great saints, the Messenger ﷺ said that through these saints, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives victory to the Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because these 40 people in Asham, 40 pious male and female individuals, through these abdal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wards off calamities from the Muslims, and through them, through their du'as, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives rain at times of poverty, at times of drought. So Sayyidina Ali said this as well. Sayyidina Ali mentioned the abdal. Sayyidina Umar mentioned it. When Asham was conquered, Sayyidina Umar asked people that, did you meet anybody in Asham who you would consider to be amongst the abdal? And a lot of the terminology that we use as Muslims came a lot later. So the Sahaba didn't use these words like tafsir, or we're going to translate the Quran into Urdu or English and we're going to explain it and that's called tafsir. No, they never used that term. That term came a lot later. They didn't use the word sharh when we do the commentary of hadith, we call it sharh. That was not used by the early generations. It came later. So a lot of the terminology in Islam came later on, aqidah, ilm al-kalam and so forth. So there's no issue with this terminology. And Imam Suyuti mentions the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, the early generations, who use this kind of terminology. So we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us to follow in the footsteps of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah. I'm sure many of us here have done our protests. Many of us here have written to the MP. Many of us, inshallah, we're hoping to, when it's possible, to go and visit Al-Aqsa and to give charity. So we've done whatever we can, practically. The next thing we can do now is rectify ourselves, reform ourselves, dedicate ourselves to praying 5 times a day, to attending the masajid in large numbers, like the Muslims were in large numbers in the protests in London. Let's fill our masajid for the salah, for the dars al-Quran, for the sharh of hadith, for the lessons of fiqh, and through that knowledge that we reform our character. And as Sayyidina Ali said, umara'una a'maluna, that our leaders are a reflection of our actions. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reform and rectify all of us as the masses, the lay Muslims, so that inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us good leaders inshallah. So we'll continue next week with this topic. What I would recommend in this month, that Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and Imam al-Ghazali, these are two people who were most significant at the time of the Crusades. They produced the Mujahideen and the Ulama, who gave victory to the Muslim world, and their books are still influential to this day. So I would recommend in this month of Rabi'ul Thani, the month in which Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah passed away, read his books. Read his books. The ulama, they said that if you read the books of the awliya of the past, then you can get the same benefit as though you were living in their time. So me and you were not living in the time of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and Imam al-Ghazali, but if you read their books, like Imam al-Ghazali has the Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the Islamic sciences, which is available in very good English. And then Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, he has many books, The Secret of Secrets, Silsir al-Asrar, available in English, Futuhul Ghaib, Ghuni al-Talibin. These books are now in English and Urdu. Let's spend this month, inshallah, reading their books and trying to reform our character. And many people are blessed as well when they read the books of the awliya, that they are blessed with the visions of those awliya as well. Blessed with visions, dreams of those ulama and awliya, giving them some advice or giving them glad tidings. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to act upon what's been said. And I'd like to remind you again, those of you who came a bit late now, I started the talk by saying that we have to do a lot of salawats today. That Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, he wrote this salawat, which is Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad عدد ما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. Imam al-Shafi'i said, Allah please send salawat upon our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in accordance with the number of those people who remember him and send salawat upon him, and in accordance with the number of people who do not send salawat upon him. And when he died, he was seen in a dream, and he told the person that that's the thing that benefited me the most in the hereafter, the salawat that I wrote and that I used to recite all the time. It gave me the greatest honor in the hereafter. And Shaykh Al-Azhari rahimahullah, he says that there are many people nowadays who claim to be Sufis, claim to be spiritual giants. Shaykh Al-Azhari rahimahullah, who we're talking about, he said, لا يكون صوفيا حتى يرى نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم في المنام. You know what Shaykh Al-Jilani's definition is of a Sufi? He says, nobody is a Sufi until they see Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in their dream. يَأْمُرُهُ وَيُؤَدِّبُهُ وَيَنْحَاهُ. And not only that, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you have that link with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that you see him regularly in your dreams, and he gives you orders, he prohibits you from things, and he teaches you other. And one of the best ways to connect with him sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is through doing constant salawat upon him. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to reach this level, inshallah.